Hello and welcome to part 4 of your Safe Spaces training module for creating safe spaces for LGBTQ youth. I want to make sure that you have your worksheet available that you have accessed on the resource on the website, and be ready to use pause at any time because it is a worksheet that you're going to kind of be working on, answering questions and kind of jotting down your ideas throughout the training. So, inclusivity and representation. Now, we are going to talk about in this section what these two words mean and how they affect the feeling of safety and welcoming for all people really in your organization, how those affect the safety of your space and the level of safety for LGBTQ youth. Now, you might ask, why? Why is this something that's important to consider when we're talking about LGBTQ youth specifically, and it's because we want LGBTQ folks to feel like insiders, like they're part of the decisions that are made and that they're part of the audiences that matter, instead of just a community that you want to try and bring to your space. They're included in the kind of spaces that are being made, or they're included in the decisions. And so these are things that we think can help kind of make your space be more inclusive, and that's definitely part of making your space safe. So for the objectives of inclusivity and representation, we're going to talk about what these words actually mean and what we mean when we say them in this training. And then we're going to talk about this part of safe spaces on 4 levels and a means of assessment. So again, like I said before, make sure you have your worksheet, be ready to use pause, and then we will begin on our assessing your organization. So actions and practice can speak louder than words. So we've spent a lot of time talking about words and attitudes, but you can say that you are inclusive, but until you kind of turn the critical eye on your organization, true inclusion can be questioned and changed. And so you can effectively change the safety of the place, or the visibility of a place by looking at this critically. Here are some working definitions of what we mean by these words, and I've included diversity in this set of definitions as well because I think it's also important. So first, inclusivity. What I mean when we talk about inclusivity is the inclusion is being part of what everyone else is, being welcome and embraced as a member who belongs. So instead of somebody who's just included to be tokenized and really their opinion doesn't matter, it's somebody whose opinion does matter and who actually belongs and is part of creating this space that is safer. For diversity, we want to talk about it as a broad term encompassing all of the ways that we human beings are both similar and different. It involves variations in factors we control as well as those over which we have no choice. And so to kind of talk about diversity, I've listed on the side here a few of the reasons, or not a few, there's a lot of them, of the ways that there might be differing identities or communities amongst people, and we want to make sure that we keep in mind. And then that comes really down to representation. So for representation, we're going to consider that a factor of whose presence is valued and whose voice is heard. Instead of someone just being there to be there, they're actually part of the space and part of the people in power, and also the people whose opinions are taken into account. And so I've listed, we have race, socioeconomic status, gender, sexual orientation, ability, education level, geographic origin, ethnicity and culture, age, language, lifestyle, and religion. And these are just some of the ideas of what kinds of things, what kinds of facets of people that we want to make sure are included when we talk about diversity. The 4 general areas that we were going to discuss these, the actual inclusivity and representation, are environment, personnel, interactions, and resources. So these are 4 different areas that we'll split up just to make them more digestible parts, to make sure that we're kind of seeing the whole picture, as well as getting down to the nitty or gritty details. And we're going to start with environment. So environment has a lot to do with how your space is considered safe. So when we're thinking about physical space, think about where you're located. Is there a sign on the door that says, gay youth, or is it a place where youth can go into that is confidential, and that brings us to confidentiality? Is it a physical space that's accessible? Can people in wheelchairs get to your space? How do youth travel to your space? Do they take the bus? Is it located on a bus line? Can they walk there? And those are just kind of ideas about physical space that you want to keep in mind. Also, once inside your space, there are things like gender-neutral bathrooms. Is there a place for someone who's maybe questioning their gender identity to be able to safely use the bathroom and not be questioned on what their gender identity is? An open door policy. So is it an open space that you have working in your organization? Are youth encouraged to ask questions and to be using the space as fully as it can be? And one thing I think that can really affect the safety of a space or the inclusion of a space is just kind of friendliness. And so that brings me to do you have a greeter at the door? Do you have somebody who is just saying hello? When a youth walks in, does somebody acknowledge that they've come in? Or is it kind of, a quiet space and nobody takes ownership over that? The next part in environment to look over is kind of what do you have displayed on the walls? Do youth see people that look like them included in their space? Do they see the examples of empowering role models that we might want to be making sure are included and provided? So in that case, is there art that shows role models that aren't just that aren't just white, or that aren't just I don't know, whatever you think would be the normal day-to-day? Are you reaching out to find art and posters that kind of represent differing identities, diversity? With media and pamphlets and literature, do you include music? Do you include films and books that are on the topics that might be of interest to LGBTQ youth? I want to make sure that I let you know we have linked to a lot of different ideas of maybe some media, art, and posters that you might want to include for your youth to help them kind of see the empowering role models that they might want to be and be able to find those. Our next step, and if you're following along with your worksheet, the next step is personnel. So first we're going to ask, are you asking the right questions? So are you even asking the questions about personnel and inclusivity and diversity? And maybe what are those questions that might be the right ones? When you're talking about staff diversity, is it a matter of tokenizing, or is it a way of including all people's voices on all levels? And some questions that can help you answer that. How diverse would you consider the staff at your agency? What does your agency do to encourage people of diverse backgrounds to apply? Is diversity represented across all staff levels, including manager positions, to ensure that you're showing that everyone's voice matters on a varying levels of what might be the powers that be in your organization? And those are questions you really have to answer for yourself, and you can kind of take down your notes in the worksheet. So when you're thinking about personnel, are these things governed in your policies? Are there certain folks whose opinions are treated with less weight than others? We have some questions here to help you understand that for yourself as well. How do staff members treat one another? How is respect maintained? And how do staff members act toward guests or participants? It's very important to consider personnel as the way that interactions happen between personnel, because they're really the model for the way that your participants or your youth act in your space. And so if staff are modeling uninclusive or unsafe language or unsafe behavior or harassment, then you can't expect more from your youth. You have to be able to model that as well. And the last thing about personnel is, does your organization support or give trainings around or workshops around diversity trainings, cultural awareness, cultural competency, and critical thinking? These are things that all of us should continually be talking about and thinking about. And if you had any questions or doubts on whether or not your organization is diverse or inclusive, then these are things that are ways to start looking at it. And I would even encourage that, some organizations that are dedicated to social justice or differing identities to continue these conversations. Safe spaces are a starting point to making a safer world for everyone, and there's no ultimate safe space. There's only working towards it, and this is part of working towards something, and we all can improve. Okay, so our third digestible bite of inclusivity and representation is interactions, and we just started touching on that in the section before. So if you see unfair treatment in your organization, do you bring it up? How does your organization interact with clients? How does your organization interact with those seeking services, or maybe even youth participants? How do participants treat one another? Are these governed in your policies and procedures manual? So like I was saying before, if your staff is modeling kind of the way that you would like people to be treated in your space, this is important to point out for the youth that are in your space. And one way you can do that is to make sure that these interactions are governed in your policies and procedures. And this is something that we will go much further into detail in the last section 6. So make sure to look for that. Another way that your organization interacts with your youth participants is through its intakes and information gathering. Demographic questions can be really indicative of how you plan to be inclusive. And so if you include questions that talk about varying sexualities and gender identities, then somebody might know, oh, this is somebody who's thinking about me, who's thinking that I might be coming here, that can make a difference to a young person who's looking to be accepted for whoever they are. And we also have a link to the Lambda Legal Basic LGBTQ Policies, Training, and Services for Child Welfare Agencies linked to on the resource page that you can access to kind of look at ways of changing your demographic questions and making your policies more non-discriminatory. So you must think about the ways that interactions are treated. So how are interactions amongst participants handled? Is it something through organizational culture? Do you employ conflict mediation? Are there discussion groups? Is there somebody who facilitates kind of problem solving that occurs? Are there peer-to-peer communication and interaction? So do you encourage youth to deal with these issues together? And of course I can't stress enough the importance of allies, youth leaders, and responsible adults, and being part of making spaces safer and encouraging interactions that are healthy and inclusive for everybody around. So if there's conflict, then you have to think about these different methods that I've just mentioned and kind of think about what methods would be good for your space, what would work best for your space between your staff, between the youth and the staff, and between the youth or amongst the youth. Thinking about using different modes of mediation and communication that can be helpful. I also have here a resource that I think is very valuable from advocates for youth, and they are lesson plans on sexual orientation and gender identity. So they list some ideas on how to improve understanding and inclusive thinking amongst youth and staff, and you can find those on the web, on the resource page as well. And I would really have you, if this is something that you want to get more in depth with, then definitely check this part out. And lastly, under resources, we have, I did mention before that we have samples of inclusive questions for intake forms and demographics questions, and one of the organizations that has done that is the Gay and Lesbian Medical Association, and we are linked to this as well. So that the way that you can change your intake so that all the words and questions can be rephrased so that they are inclusive. We also have some of those representation resources that I was talking about before. They include ideas on kind of finding inclusive library of books or movies or literature, and then links to different biographies on famous LGBTQ people, so that you have examples of empowering role models for LGBTQ youth. And here's our information once again, if you want to look further into the resources that we have. And lastly, if you have questions on any of these issues that we've just gone over, then make sure to go ahead and contact me. I would really encourage you to take a minute and look through your worksheet, the part 4, and kind of go through the table and list out the aspects in which your organization is inclusive, and maybe aspects of which your organization is unsafe, and places where you can improve. And you can take kind of the ideas that we've given you here and work on it. All right, and your next section will be part 5, resources and services.